on a couple more hosts and we'll be good to go. There we go. We got Henry in the room.
Wait.
Hey, Henry.
Hey, Henry.
Hey guys, good morning, good afternoon. All right. Who are we waiting on?
Is 5-1 with us today?
No, he's not. He's traveling.
Okay. I think that's pretty much everyone. We got one more minute and we'll get things kicked off. We're live on YouTube. Welcome everyone who's starting to file in. If you have to change your chat settings. If you're new to us, please make sure to change your chat settings to all panelists and attendees. That helps us keep track of the chat room and all questions directed at us. It helps us answer all questions and follow along. Welcome back, everyone. Looks like we've got everybody. Go ahead and kick this off. Welcome to episode 75. If you're just now joining us for the first time, welcome to Tour Management 101. Hello to all of our YouTube watchers. If you've yet to subscribe and like, please make sure to follow us on our YouTube channel. Keeps you up to date with all of our latest TM101 webinars coming up soon. And like always, I usually will pass it off, but today we got a new quick tip of the day. I'm going to pass it to, I think, Henry to play the quick tip of the day, or from MJ.
Okay.
Hey, it's Mary Jo. This week's quick tip is work on building great relationships with your promoter and venue reps.
Makes sense. It's perfect for today's class because that's what we're talking about here. So here, let me take it off to our, well, thank you, MJ, for our quick tip. So we're going to go into local labor. So a wise person once said, the local crew is like an army to the touring team of commanding officers traveling on the road. Together, they are tasked with small missions that eventually lead to a show, but the mission isn't complete until the show is put back in the box and sent on its way, only to be repeated the next day. This symbiotic relationship between the local crew and touring crew happens every day, day in and day out of every venue around the world, but joining two forces with a common goal doesn't happen overnight. It requires a lot of advanced and direct leadership skills to execute on the day, like two generals leading their teams into battle. And no matter what the enemy is that day, we always rise to the occasion and complete the mission. But at the end of this war, hopefully there are no casualties, only high fives, the hopes of free t-shirts, and the promise to do it all over again next time. So today's class, we're going to cover local positions, terminology, union labor, settling labor bills, and how you can sign up to join your local crew and become a stagehand today. So let's get into it. Our guests today are a perfect pair for this lesson. Let's please welcome Steve Drymalski and Tom Bolstad. Thanks for joining us, guys.
Thank you.
You said the hope of free t-shirts.
The hope of free t-shirts. You got that one right. It's true. But Jim, take it away.
All right, well, let's get started. First off, Steve, why don't you tell us about yourself?
Well, I am a production manager, currently working for Pearl Jam and Neil Young. I've also worked in that same role for Soundgarden, Kings of Leon, Aerosmith, The Cure, and several others. I started in this business back in 1988. I got into it as I was in college and was walking through the student union one day when somebody grabbed me and asked me if I would like to run Spotlight for an Arlo Guthrie show that night. And I was like, sure, no problem. I've never done it before. So that was my first experience working in the music business outside of playing in a band. So I worked around town as a stagehand in
What town was this?
In Milwaukee.
In Milwaukee.
worked at the Riverside Theater, worked at the Eagles Club in the Rave, ultimately started working out at Alpine Valley, which is a 35,000 seat shed, and kind of worked my way up through the ranks and became a local crew steward and a stage manager by the early 90s, and then found myself out on the road with the lighting company Upstaging for several years, and then came back to work locally for what was then SFX, which became Clear Channel, and then Live Nation and so forth. And they ended up sending me to the Target Center in Minneapolis in 2002, I believe, and worked at the Target Center as the house guy and as the regional touring rep for that area until 2005, when Charlie Hernandez plucked me out of there and made me the Live Nation tour rep for Aerosmith. And then ultimately, somewhere down the pike, I became the production manager for Aerosmith. And that was where things rolled on.
All right, Tom, why don't you tell us about yourself?
Well, like many, started out playing in bands, working in theater as a kid, and of course, AV tech. In college, I got a job at the Guthrie Theater, shifted scenery, and found that to be pretty entertaining for a couple of years. And the union gentleman there decided that I'd be good for the Orpheum Theater and recommended me for that. So in 1975, I got a union job at the Orpheum Theater in Minneapolis, and my union card shortly thereafter. The next year, I was at Guthrie's experimental stage as lights and sound, and a year after that, back at the main stage as their house audio, which I did for a little over a decade. And from there, I did a few years of experimentation, failed jazz studio, but a bunch of other gigs around town, freelance, and with the union at various halls. The Target Center in Minneapolis was about to open, and I applied for the audio job there, and ended up taking over the job as audio and stage manager / union steward for that venue, and spent my last 28 years of my career working there and around town doing stadium and festival shows, corporate events, and whatever else would come up that I enjoyed doing. Been retired now for about 3 years and spend most of my time in the mountains.
Nice, nice. Doug?
Yeah, thanks, guys. You've heard it already, and we'll be talking about it a lot today, but unions, especially to our friends outside of the US, this might be something that is new to you in live music. Steve, can you start us off by giving us a brief history of unions in the music industry, if you wouldn't mind, and why we have them, what they are?
Well, I think that the union started out purely through theatrical points throughout the history of the U.S. And when traveling shows would come through, it was the union that would supply all of the stage labor, because a traveling show would basically carry the actors, and the sound and the lights and the carpentry was all done through local union reps. And as the business evolved and became ultimately the music business into the 1950s and 60s, obviously things began to change. And touring groups started actually carrying sound and lights and other production facets with them. And that was when really the role of the house union became to facilitate those needs for the touring artists. That has evolved throughout the years, from mostly local production being provided to depending on the tour, mostly tour production being provided. So the roles of the local union have definitely kind of taken on different aspects depending on the kind of show that you're bringing into the venue, as well as what the venue is. They are essentially the main labor force when a tour goes in, we obviously travel with, anywhere between 5 and 60 crew members, sometimes even less than that. So the brunt of the labor in the course of the day, we really depend on the local people to do it.
Great. Yeah. And we'll get into this through the course of the episode, but working with union crew versus working with non-union crew can be a very different experience, right?
Absolutely.
Tom, IATSE is the most common union that we come into contact with in the music industry and touring in general, but there are other unions. Can you tell us about some of those?
Well, first and foremost, you'll run into Teamsters within the trucking industry. And in some venues, your agreement to unload and load trucks will be with the Teamsters as opposed to the IA. In Minneapolis, mostly we were IA in all of our venues, and only on occasion would use Teamsters with certain promoters, matter of fact, back in the day, who would have contracts themselves with the Teamsters. Mm-hmm. In the East Coast, you'll tend to run into some other, and I can't speak to all the specifics, but IBEW, et cetera, electricians who would do part of the labor also. But in my particular experience, I didn't have to deal with any of that.
Got it. And some venues have union crew and some don't. Can you tell us how that comes about and why?
Well, again, it's a bargaining unit basically that decides to have a union or not, and a club even can decide to go union, whether they choose the IA to represent them or not. But in other words, they will bargain together. So some places will get an agreement with the union, some will get agreement with other people, some will just use freelancers. And, of course, it depends on the leverage of the labor force and the needs of the venue to balance out and be able to come to a collective bargaining agreement there.
Beautifully put. Adrian, over to you.
Hello, gentlemen. Great to see you guys. Hi, Stevie D.
Hello.
So we're going to dive a little bit deeper as we progress into the episode. So we want to do a lightning round of some terminology with you guys for those of our viewers who don't inherently know these terms. So Steve, I'm going to come to you first. First term is steward.
A steward is the union point person in charge of basically representing the labor for the day. So any way you want to break out your local crew to help your touring crew, you communicate all that through the steward. Likewise, the steward is the one who's keeping track of hours and dealing with the payroll aspects of the day.
Who are the heads?
The heads represent each of the departments, and that can vary from venue to venue greatly. So it really depends on how the venue is contracted with the union. But we have audio, we have video. Sometimes audio and video are included together. There's electrics / lighting, carpentry, you have wardrobe, so any department that is, you would delineate labor to, has a head that they represent that crew as to how they're going to break up their people and solve any issues in the course of the day.
Copy. Who are the hands?
The hands are the local labor pool that get called in through the union office and or the venue. Essentially, they're to be broken up, sent to the touring team, and help set up during the course of the day.
Who are the loaders and what do they do?
Loaders are the guys in the truck who unstack and stack the cases and get the cases out to the dock. Typically, that's where their responsibility stops.
Note, hands and loaders are two different situations, right?
Sometimes, yes. Okay. In terms of in referencing terms, yes, they are. It really depends on the venue and how they break up their labor. More often than not, loaders are a separate department than hands. And as Tom pointed out, sometimes the loaders can be from a completely different union. You can have IATSE stagehands and Teamster loaders. So you would literally have a different steward who represents the Teamsters than you would the IATSE steward. But and in different venues, the loaders have different responsibilities. Sometimes if it's a Teamsters union, you may find those guys are in charge of, anything on wheels, i.e. forklifts. In some of the East Coast stricter venues, you may need the Teamsters to actually bring your trucks into the loading dock. So where they would be, they would hook up a day cab to the trailer and back the truck into the dock.
Interesting, day cab. Okay, upriggers and downriggers.
An uprigger is the person who climbs up into the steel and basically is connecting the points to the building, to the motors that will ultimately lift the PA and truss up and down.
Okay.
And downrigger is the person who is assisting the uprigger from the ground, marking out the points where they need to be, where they need to hang, and working with the tour rigger to help locate those points, to find out where they best be hung in the building for engineering purposes. And essentially they're responsible for putting all the steel together, everything from the case to the chain, and then the upriggers take it from there.
Great. Electrics.
Electrics, mostly lighting falls mostly under these people. Also, any power is the main thing. So where you connect to the building, that would be your electrician. And when I do my hand calls, I put an electrician on the call specifically to deal with power, so that there's somebody on the call at any course during the day. Whereas if someone from your department needs to plug into something, whether it be light, sound, audio, etc., they can go to that person who is keeping track of what power is going where and how it's being pushed out.
Thank you. And to be clear, we're not allowed to plug our own stuff in most of the time. I don't know, so this is a very, very important thing to talk about. We've touched on it previously, but here is where it's most relevant. Audio. Go for big audio.
Audio obviously are the departments that's putting, in charge of the PA or setting the PA up. In some locals, video falls into this department as well.
Copy. Thank you, Stevie D. Love you long time. Hi, Tom.
Hello.
Nice to see you, friend.
Good to see you.
Okay, we're going to talk about a mini. When you talk about a 4-hour mini, what dat?
Well, it's a 4-hour call. Basically, guys are called in. They're always given a minimum amount of hours. It could be different in some venues, but the standard is 4 hours. So that's what your minimum is.
What's a call time?
Call time can vary. For your load-ins and load-outs, they're pretty specific. It's what time you want the hands to be there. For a show, there's something that's called the half hour that gets confusing for people. But say your show time is at 8 o'clock. The standard in the industry is to bring your hands in a half hour before that. And that would be the call time for a show. Also, there's the continuity hour, which gets thrown into that mix also, which if you need to do some work before a show, for instance, if you're doing multiple shows, and you can do that in an hour, you can do that with just an hour's worth of pay prior to half hour. Calling the guys in, say for an 8 o'clock show at 6:30 to do an hour's worth of work prepping for the show.
Right, and this is where planning comes in. Breaks, I can define that. It's the thing that if missed, make the men frantic.
Yes, you want to make sure they get their coffee breaks and meal breaks. The coffee breaks is just a consideration and can vary a lot, but you want to make sure you get your meal breaks in 5 hours.
Okay, perfecto. What's a walk away?
Well, that means basically we're going out to lunch instead of being catered.
A meal penalty.
Meal penalty is a penalty for going past 5 hours without either giving your crew a half hour to go eat at catering or giving them an hour off to go out and eat.
So 30 minutes if it's in the building and you're providing, or an hour if they've got to go out, is pretty standard?
Pretty standard.
Okay. Dark stage.
Dark stage is when everyone walks away. No work will be done. There are some exceptions that you can negotiate with somebody if something needs to be fixed or worked on occasionally. But in theaters specifically, usually this dark stage means everyone goes away, leaves the stage.
That's an important thing to know about in your day. If it sneaks up on you, it can be a real problem. So always, yeah.
Also in the transition of going from clubs to theaters, that catches a lot of people off guard because, right, they expect to be able to just hang out with their equipment, even if they aren't really doing anything, tune guitars, whatever. But you have to take that in consideration into certain theaters, without a doubt.
True. And that's got to be something that's communicated to your crew, because a well-meaning tech could meander onto stage, touch something, and cause an international incident that you don't want to have with the union.
Feels that way.
Yeah, it does sometimes, right? And a dark day, Tom.
A dark day means for sure there's no show, often no work at all.
Got it. Okay.
It can be used as a work day if necessary sometimes, but definitely means no show.
Again, we go back to relationships. If you need things, you talk to folks like Tom and your counterparts in the venue and see what you can do. Otherwise, time and a half, double time.
Time and a half and double. Time and a half is just like a normal worker after 8 hours, after 40 hours in a week. Double time is usually a premium rate between midnight and 8 a.m. in the areas I worked.
Great. Walk and chalk, or chalking.
Chalking the floor is when you come in and you're getting ready for the day. The riggers are laying out their motor points with a nice little X on the floor all over the place, which is where we want motors hung. Also, if we have a rolling stage or any other kind of pieces of equipment like that we might need to mark out on the floor, we'll do that at that time also. Front of house position, likewise.
That's the point in the day when folks are staring at the ceiling in a group. It's just my favorite thing to see. I don't know why I love that. What are the fringes?
Fringe benefits are something that you have to figure into your bill. And that's, payroll costs, basically. Pensions, taxes, insurance. And I've seen them as high as 38%. So it's something you definitely want to take into consideration. And any venue should be able to give you that straight up, payroll kind of information in their package. But pay attention.
Pay attention, indeed. Okay. So just briefly, we have talked about the broadcast fee, the recording fee, and the origination fee. Can we just touch on those and the differences really quick before we move on?
Well, most of them come out to the origination fee has nothing to do with the local labor. Broadcast and recording fees are usually one and the same in terms of their cost and can vary dramatically from venue to venue. At the arena where I worked, it was a time and a half of the show rate. So basically $50 for a regular show was the added cost. At our theaters in town, on the other hand, it's $175 per man if you decide to record. So one of those things that if you're thinking of, good to know the rules about it. Certain venues are certainly much easier to record than others.
And there are some historic venues where that fee can be tens of thousands of dollars.
Yeah, and in New York, it's really $100,000 origination fee. So, and these are things that you have to be very careful that will sneak up on you. Also, you might think that the videographer that's following your artist around is just an archival situation. But the moment that a venue or union person sees a camera in the venue, you start to have a conversation about a recording fee, a broadcast fee. Where is that going? Is it archival? Is it meant to be used for public consumption? These are things you just want to be sure that you're watching as you are working in union venues. Yeah, I think that covers me. And over to you.
Can I just tag on to that, Adrian?
Yeah, please.
I would say this is a really, really great point, and one that the photo video videographer role is almost ever present on tour. And there are a lot of people who maybe they can come out on their first ever tour. They don't need to have tour experience to be a talented photographer or videographer. It's really important you stress that and have a conversation with them before the tour goes out, because that conversation could come up in a venue between the photographer and the venue personnel who doesn't realize it's a thing, and maybe they don't know how to handle that conversation, and it can become a big issue when it need not have become. So have a conversation with your photo people.
Correct. And the backstage B-roll is a totally different animal than the well-meaning guy who arbitrarily follows his artist onto the stage. Once he gets on stage, Tom's phone is going to go off, and then Steve's phone's going to go off, and then the TM's phone's going to go off, and everybody's phone's going to go off. So that's that one. Dave Oken, thanks for the ghost light, my friend. Always great to see you. Over to Henry.
Those are good points. That's definitely something that if you forget to advance, you're about to have a really bad day if the house is strict on it. But hey, we're going to talk about advancing for the local crew, because we've done many episodes teaching our students how to build the tour before it ever goes out on tour. And so once we have a general understanding of what our production elements are, the crew we're bringing, what we're rolling in, now, okay, I'm ready to advance. Guys, talk us through what should be my first steps in making a labor call and working with the venue on saying, hey, this is what I'm bringing. This is what I think my show needs. Steve, walk me through there to a new production manager. What should my first steps be as I'm bringing this information I think I've got ready to advance to the local promoter rep? What do I need? What ducks do I need to have in a row?
I think the first thing that you need to do is, as your production develops in rehearsals or in programming or whatever stage of production you are in, you go to your stage manager and or your department heads, your vendors, and you start asking them what they need, as far as assistance in the course of the day. Because as a production manager, I'm not living in the lighting guy's shoes or the sound guy's shoes. So they're going to let me know, well, I need 4 guys to set this up. Audio may need 6 guys here plus 4 guys at front of house. And so at that point, once I have a pretty good idea of what each department wants and what they need in order to get through the course of their day, I then look at what has been budgeted within the course of the tour between the agent and the buyer. Most of the time, that number correlates with the need, because the agent should be aware of the size of show and the standard needs of what you do historically within the context of that show. So if I look at that and those numbers don't match somehow, then my next call is to the agent to let them know, to let the buyer know, hey, our show, there's no way I can put this on with the 20 hands and pull this off. So we need to up the show. Mm-hmm. At that point, when I get into the actual advance with the promoter rep, I take all of those things into consideration as I'm making my call. As I'm making that labor call with the promoter rep, we're also having a discussion as to how that call sits within the context of the venue. So, for instance, with rigging, if you have a ceiling height that's extra high and you typically need 4 ropes working in the course of your 4-hour day, 4-hour load in order to get the lighting rig up and out of the way in time, then you need to have a conversation with the promoter rep as to how many riggers are needed in that building. Some buildings require pullers with the riggers. So you actually have 2 guys up per rope to 1 guy down on the ground. And some buildings actually have 2 pullers with a rigger to help if you've got a really long pull, like 150 plus feet, or you're pulling a lot of 2-ton motors. So in that is where they will be able to help you out. Once your call is set and in, I highly recommend, as a production manager, a stage manager, or a person who's on the floor, then you walk in morning a load in and you go straight to your union steward and you go through the call with the union steward, because I found that not always does your conversation with the promoter rep translate to the union call. So you want to catch that first thing in the morning before it becomes a problem later in the afternoon. They may go, oh yeah, you may find a lot of times that you asked for 28 stagehands and 6 up and 3 down, but maybe only that morning 24 people came. That's not necessarily the union's fault or the union steward's fault, because that may have been the call that went in. So it's always good to compare the notes first thing in the morning.
Absolutely. Tom, you must get plenty of surprises if it doesn't happen that smoothly, right? First thing in the morning, you actually see what the real job is and say, oh man, we probably should have added more hands to this call. Or, if that communication hasn't gone to you, then it could affect the whole day. And that's a good point, Steve, because I wanted to go back for a second and see that, point out to our students that there's a through line here through some of our past episodes where we were talking about, even if you are not technically savvy or you haven't been a production mind for a long time, you don't need to be the technical skill master in lighting to understand how to give your lighting department the staff they need for the day. And so you pointed out, go to your lighting crew chief and say, how many hands do you need to start off your day? And we have that conversation almost hourly. Like, what does the first hour of your build look like? Obviously, it's all just kind of coming off the trucks. But, as you go through this conversation, you may say, well, I'm going to give you, 10 hands right off the bat. And he's going to say, whoa, I can't use 10 right off the bat. I want to start with 4. And then in hour 2, give me 6 more and I'll be able to use them. The conversation can change as you get through the cases, as things start going up in the air. And so you're really choosing, and it's a game of figuring out the numbers. Lighting's going to take 10 in the morning. Audio needs 4. Backline doesn't need anything till after 12 or, after the 3 hours. So it's, I like your point there that you can go to your heads and ask them, because ultimately they are the people that are going to direct these hands. And so they need to know what they can handle. But Tom, tell me how it goes when, I've advanced everything with the promoter rep. I've told him what I think I need now. And, does knowing the house, you guys must give, every house is different. You pointed out how if it's a high ceiling, you're going to tell the local, or you're going to tell the touring production manager, hey, you know what? It's a really long push from the dock. You probably want to think about adding 4 more pushers, or it's extremely high trim height. Now, how do the conversations go in that? Because, as a PM, I can't see the house and I just have to take your word for it, but that's going to add a lot of cost to my bill. So how do these conversations normally go to figure out the best route of budget versus physical labor you need through the day to get your show up?
Well, that's an interesting question, because it's a matter of trust. If I'm going to say you're going to have to spend this much more money to make it work. Yeah. So, if you haven't been to my venue and you don't know me, it's a hard thing to, necessarily convince somebody, other than the fact that rigging, especially, and the venue I worked in, it basically took 2 men to a line, because the beams are not near a catwalk. They're out in the middle. There's nothing above them. So you have to have a guy on a beam and a guy in the catwalk to run a rope. Well, if you're on a bridle, that's 4 people involved in pulling up 1 point at a time. So depending on how complicated your show is, understanding what it takes for me to pull a point, we can maybe come to an understanding of what we think the number, if the number should go up or not. And the more complicated a show you are, or tight it is, or unflexible it is, of course, rigging wise, that becomes more critical too in terms of your manpower. Not just the number of points of what has to be pulled, but how close they have to come to the mark, how flexible you can be.
Yeah. That
And
is
Tom,
so
right
you
got,
can,
I want to interrupt real quick because we left two important points off of that, the glossary. Points and a bridle, please. Tom, what's a point?
a point
Super important. Rigging points are everything.
is a chain motor, basically.
Okay.
And if you're hanging it directly to a beam, if it can show up right under that beam, you can pull it up straight up. A bridle is when you have to go to two beams. And so therefore, you're creating a steel bridle that goes two directions in different lengths to hit a certain point on the floor. And that requires two teams of pullers to be pulling up to two different beams the same point.
Thank you. And we're going to put a pin in those terms because we'll be discussing them in depth in our rigging session, which is coming up shortly. Thank you. Back to you, Henry.
Well, I was just going to close up this section by talking about, the relationship we have once we show up to the venue. And sometimes, when we get there, like you said, we've asked for 30 hands, but only 24 showed up, and that could have a huge effect in the day. As you pointed out, if rigging is not advanced properly, it could potentially stall doors. If you haven't done it right, it could slow things down. But we wanted to just make a point about how you handle things when you get there, and it's not the same numbers. You're still ultimately one team working together. And so, Steve, tell me about that and how we approach things and changes. And look, shit happens, but what do we do?
It's all about communication and conversation. I personally don't ever walk into a venue looking for adversaries. Like I see, whether it's the promoter rep, whether it's the union steward, whether it's the stagehands, as part of the team. And so we're all there to solve issues together. The old adage is we have no problems, only solutions. So, I really try and tour under that guise. And I think, when you get out and you've done a few laps, you tend to come across the same faces all the time, and you do start to build relationships with people, and you do get to know people. So, that steward for the day today is going to be the same steward down the line. And if you have a bumpy path with that person, that's going to come back to haunt you later. So, I think it's important to just have open communication. And in the end, we have to remember it's a business. So it's not about personal things, right? Where you're, as a production manager, a tour manager, a stage manager, you're looking out for what the best interests of the show are. As a union steward, you're looking out for what the best interests of your crew are. As a promoter rep, you're dealing with the best interests of the company. And then you have the venue person there as well, who's looking out for the best interests of the venue. So we all have our own little things that we're looking out for, but in the end, we're all there to put on a great show for everybody and make the day as smooth as possible. We're all on that same wavelength. So I don't see anybody who's trying to throw up obstacles. So typically, with a little bit of conversation, one can get through those obstacles without much drama.
With as little as possible.
It's always one of those things where, like, if you're coming in with not enough hands and I can get more, then the decision is, when can I get them there? And is that going to be useful to you? Or can we use the hands that I have longer and still make it to sound check at an appropriate time? And for instance, on a bad rigging day, I might start pulling guys from my other crews, if it's okay with you, and putting them on that team to help them out. For instance, because that's the first thing that has to happen. And we have all kinds of options, but we got to look forward, not to what problem, why the problem had at that point. We got to figure out what we're going to do next.
Bingo.
And don't assume.
Yeah. Oh, Mark, you're on mute. Go ahead and take it.
Super important points, and just continuing the conversation and advancing. And I'll never forget the first day I dealt with union and navigated working with union venues and hands and things like that. Passing this over to you, Tom. As a steward, how do you handle a day with an up and coming act who is very inexperienced, and handling a day with a new TM from a crew side?
Well, the trick there is, I think, just getting as much information from him as you can right off the get-go in terms of how does he want his day to flow? What does he expect to keep? Which guys does he expect to feed? How many of them? And which departments are done first? All those kind of things, so that I can keep an eye on the day and see how it's flowing and know if something's not going smoothly, and give him a heads up of how we can address that. What we have to, who should keep, maybe we should feed people early, maybe we should not, how are we going to get the flow to happen because of what's changing as it goes. If I know what he's going for, I can adjust to what's happening easier than if I don't. And I think that's the real key to dealing with somebody new.
Running off some points, if you can give him an idea of how they want their day to work at the beginning, that's the best way to handle it. I think being open in communication and being open to listen and learn as well was the best thing that helped me as well. And it's like a rite of passage working with your first union venues, and it definitely, being there with the steward and communicating properly is going to help you look out for your bottom line and not have a big learning lesson at the end of that show. Even when it came to like after the show was done, and I'll never forget, the artist wanted to sign autographs and we had stagehands right there ready to go, and just every second mattered, and you just didn't realize that at the time. And then you look at the settlement and you're like, yeah, you just let your artists hang out there with the crowd and sign autographs and do X, Y, and Z. And just those little things that you don't know about is going to cost you, big time at the end of the day. But I'm going to defer.
I wanted to add to that, because this is an important thing for, we're talking about if you're a newer act, and this happens all the time, of an act that just blows up and all of a sudden you're playing a big room, and maybe your production crew or yourself have not played a venue or a stage that big. It can be rather scary. And so, this is another one of those through lines where you need to, the best way to go about this is to be the person that's going to ask all the questions and not act like you know it all, but like to go to Tom, go to Steve and say, like, how are we going to do this? Like, what do you recommend we do? It's, that's the kind of thought process you should be having. But sorry, go ahead and take it, Doug.
No, it's a great point, and it kind of feeds into what I'm about to say. And I think, Steve, your life, the life of the production manager, in the same way that the life of the tour manager is a series of negotiations day to day with your crew, with your department heads, with the local teams, and your job is the mediator, and you're kind of in a lot of ways on hiding to nothing, because you're going to have to disappoint someone. You're the one who has to draw the line and has to get it to a compromise situation where the show actually happens, but that the budget isn't stretched beyond impossibility. So on the flip side of what Mark was talking about, what do you do when you encounter resistance from the other side? When if you need a number of hands or local crew, whatever it is, but you're encountering resistance, what do you do?
Well, first off, I think as the production manager, what you're shooting for in the scope of things is continuity. So whether you're going into a club or a theater or a arena or a festival, it can be different every single day. And it's your mindset how to make that venue as close to yesterday's venue and tomorrow's venue every single time. So you use that as your baseline. You use that as the place when you're making decisions off of. and so in order to communicate that to the locals, that's where you're coming from. With regards to any obstruction, obviously a budget is a bottom line. And if you're going in and maybe ticket sales weren't that great, and the promoter is very concerned about cutting costs wherever they can, of course you want to help them out. But I think you also have to maintain your continuity line, and pick and choose your battles. There are some times you don't want to get into it with the promoter rep. You don't need to cause a fight or get in an argument with them. I think a discussion, make your best case as to why you do need something. Most of the time they'll understand that. They do understand that they're a promoter. Every once in a while, a show's not going to do so great, but that doesn't mean that you can't give the artists what they need. Sometimes you can't give the artist everything they want, but you got to give the artist what you need. And as a production manager, that's your line. That's, what you need to get through the course of the day. I think that if you ever do get into a scenario where you're at an impasse with the promoter rep in the advance, and they say, this is, I've talked to my boss, I can't go forward, we can't give you any more stagehands, we can't give you any more riggers, or this situation, you say, okay, I understand 100%, but also know that I have to make a call to the agent, and hopefully between the agent and the buyer, they can talk through this and figure this out on their own. This has gone beyond our decision to make. It's somebody else's decision. So at that point, I think that's where you go and let a different entity handle the problem.
That's such a great point, and I want to just take a second to acknowledge it, because it's true of almost everything we do in the production office on tour. But it's a very delicate conversation and a delicate balance to strike with the person that you're dealing with, whether you're the production manager talking about crew or you're the tour manager talking about something else with the promoter's rep. If you have that conversation and you both acknowledge that you've hit loggerheads, and you approach it like Steve did there, where you said, look, I need this to happen, so I'm going to take it to the agent, just so you know, you're never going to have a problem with that, in my experience and in our collective experience from our conversation yesterday. But if you just, say, okay, whatever, and then you just go and deal with it on your own, and it comes to them from above that it's been dealt with, that's a different dynamic, and that causes a potential friction. And it's walking into show day with a dark cloud there, and with something that may cause friction. So I think in everything we do, particularly in that sort of when you have to escalate a conflict, it's important to identify it and then deal with it, so that you both win in that situation. Because 9 times out of 10, you might find that the person you're talking to, their hands are tied as well. And they want the situation resolved just as much as you do, but they don't have the authority to make the call. So, sometimes taking it to the agent and let the agent and the buyer hash it out, as Steve said, is the way to move that roadblock, and you both win. Tom, from your side, if you're hitting, on the flip side of what Steve said, if you're hitting roadblocks from the tour side and you're suggesting something that you think needs to happen, but they're resistant to it, is there anything you would add to that?
Well, other than just, explaining the options to the gentleman, the only thing that can happen often when we don't have enough labor in that situation is it costs more. That's usually the fear, that you're bringing X amount of crew into another hour rather than adding 4 guys. And as long as it's your decision, I have to be okay with it, whatever your call is. I just have to present you with the options.
Absolutely.
Over to you. When sometimes we walk into situations with union houses that are hands off, can you tell us how that is, or what that is, and also how should a TM or a PM handle those situations?
Well, I'm the wrong guy in some ways to ask about that because none of our venues in Minneapolis are that way. Although I understand in a union situation, it's their job. And you're coming in to take their job. If you understand that, you'll understand why they're looking at it the way they're looking at it. It's not that they're trying to say you can't do it or you're not good at it or anything like that. They're just saying, I'm protecting my job. And there's a long history there. And you can get around a lot of it just by being there and working with the guys in most of those situations, as I understand. But I haven't been there doing it, so it's hard for me to give you a true answer there.
Yeah, and I think like we've been talking about, I think the biggest thing is just having that communication and understanding what the rules are and working with everybody involved to make it work, following those rules. And having a good relation with the local people rather than demanding that you touch the gear. Steve, you have a good story regarding that. You want to tell us that?
There was and it involves Tom. When we were together at the Target Center years ago, we were doing a show, and in the course of the advance, I had been talking with I was the house person at the time. I'd been talking with the production manager for the show, and the advance was going just fine. We settled on a number of stagehands, and when show day came about, we walked into the venue, did our walk and chalk, did everything we were supposed to do. Everything looked good and great. The stagehands were there. The tour labor was there. We started unloading trucks. I went up to my office to take care of some business. I got a call from Tom on the radio. Said, "Can you come down for a second? I need to talk to you." When I got back down on the floor, there were literally probably 25, 30 more touring labor that had just showed up out of nowhere. And the tour said, "Well, these are our techs." And they were actually kids. They were, very unexperienced in serving as box pushers. And I looked at Tom, I said, "Are you okay with this?" And he's like, "No, I'm not okay with this, not at all." So, at that point in time, went back to the show and had a discussion as to, we can't do this. These people have to disappear right now. Like, this isn't okay. If we knew we were going to have 50 road people here, we would have to bump the stagehand call up, and you knew that, and da 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 da. So it found its way back to where it needed to be, and they knew what they were trying to do, so they didn't really have an argument within the scope of it, and those people did disappear, and we moved forward through the course of the day.
And I think that's the key. And one of the things that Tom brought up is this you're not going to find, we're talking about hands-off venues right now. We know that there's a handful of those that exist in the world where chances are you may never come across that situation. But I think the important thing about knowing that is that you should know going into your venue and have the proper communication of what your limitations are. Sometimes it means you can't touch a case. Sometimes it means, hands-off can mean various things. There's a lot of unions that you can't touch a case until it's on stage and opened up. You don't do it. You just have to go into it knowing what your limitations are and having good communication and make everybody's on the same page on who can do what and when.
Can I take a second to maybe dumb this down to our students just a tad more? It gets this crazy where, for example, a monitor engineer's console, the road case is on the truck. Now that monitor engineer cannot go into that truck or step anywhere near it or touch that case. So then it could be a day where you're using Teamsters and it's a strict union, and the Teamsters will be in the truck and push that case out of the truck. And once it passes a line, and literally there sometimes is a line painted on the loading dock, and they push that road case to the other side of the line. And then now the union stagehands will then grab that case and pull it onto the stage, take the lid off, flip it up, and then the engineer can then touch his console and work from there. It's that crazy.
Maybe because there might be an audio an
Yeah.
audio tech that needs to do it, the plugging in of things before the engineer can actually engineer the thing.
And I think that's
do you
the
want
point
to, Steve, do you
of
want to
this
tell that
audio.
monitor story really quick that just happened a few weeks
well,
ago?
I think it all comes down to communication. You
Yeah.
know, you're referring to a show I recently did where it was the advanced discussion was it's hands off. You know, our people are the board ops, and you know the artists that I was with, we have some very peculiar needs that require the person who we have as our monitor engineer. That's why we have a monitor engineer to deal with those scenarios. So so even though I was basically hitting a brick wall in the advance, we just kept communicating. And even first thing in the morning, when we got to Loden, I took our monitor engineer and we went straight to the audio head. We had a conversation, and in the end, it turned out there was no issues. So you know, it's not I think you have to express your needs, but don't panic and don't get in an argument about it, because the people that you're working with are professionals and they understand why you need to do certain things. They may present their case because you may not have an argument for them, but if you do have a good argument, more often than not, they will see your way and let it through.
And another thing that we should bring up that MJ just brought up to it is that in TV, a lot of the time you'll find this. It's sometimes it's union rules, sometimes it's broadcasting rules, but you'll often find out that you're not allowed to touch things and dealing with the similar situations in dealing with TV and promo situations also.
Yes. Yeah, that's very common as well.
Yeah, it's worth remembering that there are reasons for all of these rules and that there is reasonable middle ground to be made in almost every situation. You will hear the horror stories. You will hear of the outlier situations. I got chased down and stopped 50 yards from the exit of an unnamed arena with my production case that I was trying to sneak out the back door to my bus that was parked 2 blocks away. And I had to wait 10 minutes for somebody to be radioed to come push my case the remaining 50 yards, at which point it exited the building where they were no longer allowed to push it. And I had to take it the rest of the 2 blocks to my bus. And you just have to hold your hands up and go and laugh at the ridiculousness of your situation there. You know, you're not shouting at the situation is absolutely not going to resolve it. So keep your energy positive.
That's 100%. And, you know, just to wrap up Steve's point, the folks that you're working with in the hands-off situation also want to have a good show and want to have a good day. They're not trying to bollocks up your day, even though it might feel as though it's throwing a wrench in the works. Everybody wants to, we're all leaning towards the same thing. We talk about this all the time. When we roll into a venue, those are our partners for the day. So even if it seems like this is the most prohibitive situation known to man, those folks want to help you too. And now we talked about the part where we have to pay for all this and what that looks like and how we go about making sure that that our pencils are sharpened, I's are dotted, and T's are crossed. I am going to attempt a screen share. Here we go. Hello, did we get it? Do you see it?
I think it's coming. There, we got it.
Okay, so this is basically this is going to be what a sheet will look like. This one's from the Hampton Coliseum. It's quite small. What I'm going to show you is you've got your riggers and your steward is here. You've got a forklift operator, electrics. You've got hands, and another hand, I believe. We've got a rate. We've got number of hours. We've got regular hours. And this is load in, the show call, and the load out. There's overtime. So this is a basic, one-sheeter for stage and rigging. You're gonna see hours, you're gonna see total costs for stage hands, you're going to see for union crew, you're going to see line items for sometimes percent for pension, insurance, etc. That will be between 10 and 30. The total of everything obviously is the real total. So this is where we, as TM, you're going to have to make sure that what was ordered is what had arrived, is what the calls actually were. And as a TM, you're not going to know that. So you've got to go to your PM or your stage manager. You want to present the bill, and you're going to go to Steve and say, Steve, have a look at this, please. Let me know if these calls actually worked out. And we can zoom in. Here we go. Is this zooming for you guys? Zooming well? Do we see it?
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah,
You can,
okay,
you
great.
can zoom in more if you want.
Great, great, excellent. Okay, so here we are, your head riggers, steward, fork, electric, hands, and the number of hours. Here's your 4-hour mini. This one's got a 7-hour call, your 8 hours, your 6 hours. Over here we go, just to show the difference between your load-in calls, your show calls, and your loadout, okay? Here is a different, did that switch, guys?
Yes.
Great, okay. This is a different labor bill. A little bit more, it's broken out, your name, these are loaders. And over here, this would be a cover page that you might see that's going to show any administrative fees, FICA, which is your taxes and insurances, so that breaks out. And this is going to be a cover page likely for this guy. And there might be a number of pages to this. You've got your setup, your performance, and your loadout or your strike. Okay, so Steve, you know, we're not always going to know what the hands have done on the day. So I might come to you and go, hey, Steve, have a look. And you're going to review for what kind of changes?
Well, the first thing I always look for is numbers to make sure that the numbers that I put in on the advance match the numbers that are actually on the call, match the numbers that are on the sheet. So that, you know, your 3 points of reference, you know, what you wish for, what's actually there, and then what's given to you. And sometimes that can get a little bit confusing when they start, because some sheets are not as simple and direct as this, but they'll break it down by a call. So literally you'll have different calls, especially if you have departments, which both these sheets don't really show.
Right.
You could have a hand who's serving in this department or that department, and especially on multi-day runs. So you kind of have to look at that, see, you know, how it lines up with different days or different calls. This comes into play, especially during rehearsal and programming days versus show days. Because when they hand off the bill to you at the end, you know, there's a lot to look at, which is one thing to touch upon is you always want to get your dailies by the time you walk out at the end of the day. You want to know where your labor stands. You know, so if you're doing a 2, 3, 4, 5 day run in a place, you're not looking at this giant number with hundreds of names on it, trying to break down who was where and how. I know in some of the festivals that I do, you'll see names on the list, and it's really important that when you're looking at those names, sometimes a labor company, even though that person is only allowed to work 8 hours, they may put somebody 8 hours on your stage and then shift them over to 4 hours on another stage. And somehow that time and a half that they worked on another stage gets transferred over to your stage. And you got to be able to catch that kind of stuff and say, well, you know, this person wasn't in, you know, we didn't go overtime on that stage. And if the labor person says, yeah, but the person worked 12 hours, you go, but that was on a different stage, entirely different call. And that person does not, you know, that does not reflect on my bill personally as a production manager or stage manager for that particular stage. So there's a lot of nuances that you have to be able to catch and look at. It's not somebody always being shifty. Sometimes just on big calls, these things get lost. And so you have to do your due diligence to catch them. And then just look at the rates. And if you see anything in overtime or double time, sometimes that can get a little complicated too. What's time and a half versus double time? Somebody who may work over an 8-hour day gets time and a half for every hour after that, but then all of a sudden after midnight, they go into another overtime period, so they're actually getting double time. So, you want to understand that and how that works. And then, that's pretty much the scope of it, but it's paying attention through the course of the day or through the course of the call, and just being in communication with your steward. Plenty of times I've not understood a stagehand bill. After looking at thousands and thousands and thousands of them, I still come across ones that I have questions about. And inevitably, the guy who's looking at that particular sheet every single day is the person that can help you through it.
Right. And I mean, you're also talking about sometimes we've got union wardrobe people. Perhaps you need to add a seamstress. Maybe
Correct.
you don't need all those people. Things change throughout the day. It's a living, breathing, organic situation that comes in and out of buildings every day. It's not necessarily that static. So thank you for that overview. All righty, over to you, friend. Henry, that's you, babe.
Well, that's me.
Yes, friend.
This one was, I was really excited to do this one because I started as a stagehand, my first job in this industry. I joined IATSE, Local 115 here in Jacksonville, and worked my way up to a journeyman before I was able to actually get a job to go on the road with a punk rock band. And so I jumped in the van and went on tour instead, but still will always be a stagehand. And I feel like to be a master in this industry is to start there. And there's a joke sometimes I've heard where, all the best start as stagehands and end as stagehands because, you go on the road and you come back and you don't want to do it anymore, but you'll never really leave the stage. And so I want to talk about joining, your local labor force or union, because it happens to be, I think, the only job in this whole industry where you can literally go and sign up to join and learn and become a part of this industry. Now, it is an instant. You join a list of people that will get called as of this date. Shows are coming back and they are going to be needed in full force. And so I wanted to talk to Tom and Steve about that and what that looks like, because we have a lot of young students that are considering and are going to have these opportunities coming forward. So Tom, how does somebody join the union or their local labor force, and what sort of skill sets should they prepare now to have ready when they get the call?
Well, first of all, this is probably a rare opportunity to get into the labor force here in this business, because I have a feeling when we come back, it's going to come back pretty darn strong and everybody's going to be short of labor. So to start with, get a hold of your local IATSE and give them a call. See what their particular labor situation is. They usually have various opportunities to come down and sign up. Take some little testing to see what your skill set might be and fill out some information to let them know what experiences you've had, and opportunities for some educational stuff too, to just get prepared to go to a job. But in terms of what your skill set should be, anything you can get involving theater or music is going to help you out, just in terms of the terminology and language that you'll need to have to accommodate yourself there. And then, it's a physical business. You want to be ready to go to work and have clothes and tools and, your leather gloves and appropriate wear for the conditions you're going to be out in, because that is also a struggle some days.
Yeah, that's true. And like you said, that there's a list of materials and sort of conduct that comes with joining the union, and they provide you with, the list of clothes that you should wear, obviously like closed toe shoes. Don't make the rookie mistake of ever wearing sandals or anything like that. But then you need, your some basic tools. But really, like it is the best case if you want to be in this industry, and especially to our students that have been watching a long time, to really understand what it's like to run a show, you got to understand how to build a show first. And so that's from the ground up, from the ramp, from the truck ramp to the stage, and know what that's like to push these cases and get a little battle scars every once in a while, because that's where you will really learn what it takes. Because if you want to continue to grow, then you'll have that experience and knowledge of what it's like for the team, and that you are on tour directing. And so I think it's useful for everybody, and why not? It's paid training, basically. It's great, and everybody's going to need it. But so Steve, tell me, jump into this. I want to know, like, from your point of view, about being a stagehand and joining, like, what advice do you have for this?
Oh, I couldn't agree more. That's how I started. And I think as you, there's always a stagehand in heart with me. I when I walk into a call, first thing I do in the morning is go find the steward and the stagehands and say hello. I think it's an invaluable opportunity as a tour manager, as a production manager. You don't have to know how everything works. You don't have to know all the intricacies of each position on that tour. That's why you have people on the tour that do that. But you have to know how their life is affected by everybody else's place. How is it that, if the lighting guys are going to get behind in the course of the day because of a labor decision that you made earlier, how's that going to affect the audio guys? And likewise, how that 3 steps down the line is going to affect the backline guys. And then is the artist going to walk in later that day and have to wait to sound check because the whole day is running behind? Everybody here is tied into everybody else. So to learn how that chain or that link between different departments and different entities works in the course of the day only makes you stronger at your job.
Absolutely. And I'll point out that, like, I mentioned it takes time, but when you get that call, you get to go in and likely your first call may only be a load in and load out, and you don't get to work the show. But you know what? You get to see where all the work is really happening in the beginning and the end of the day. But take those calls, and if you do a good job and you want to keep doing it, let your steward know. And that, hey, I had a great time on electrics. Next time, if you think I'm ready, maybe I could try audio because I'm really interested there. Talk with them. Let them know what your interests are, because you will excel in those areas. And they want to put you in departments where you are needed first, but then if you are interested and they can help develop those skills in you, then you become a really strong member of that union, and it can be a career job. It's definitely a career for many people for decades. But anybody else have a point on that before we move forward? I think we have some questions.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that, because of the benefits of the collective bargaining agreement that unions have, getting experience as a stagehand, as a loader, in a union, you're going to be, in my experience, getting paid a lot better than you would be on a club tour. In your first club tour with the lowball offer you might get from a management, you're benefiting from a union. Unions are in place so that you don't have to go and negotiate your fees. We live in a Wild West industry, and the union crew are one of the, and a lot of us touring folks look enviously over at those union settlements and some of the, time and a half, and we make our own way in this world. So it's if it can be, as Henry said, it can be and is a career in and of itself, and you really benefit from the collective of the union and can be learning. If your ultimate goal is tour, you can be learning whilst you're earning a lot more comfortably than if you're starting out with a baby band in a sprinter, let's say.
I still did both too growing up. I was working union jobs and I was going and taking calls at the local punk rock club. You get the best of both worlds, and you learn a lot. Whether it's union, just any work around a stage is knowledge you can't buy. Let's go on to some questions. Does somebody have those queued up?
Yeah, I can start that. So, Tom, this one's from you, from our friend Odysseus. I'm going to go with maybe he might be our Greek friend, Odysseus. He'd like to know, as a European, a dark stage seems kind of weird. What's the reason for that, Tom?
Well, a dark stage is because you don't want to pay any labor during that time. If you don't want to pay any of the hands, normally we see this in a theater. And a theater will have 4 heads of department normally, and they're going to be there if you're going to work. We're willing to work with you. We don't want you to work without us. And so the stage goes dark if you want to take everyone off the clock, as simple as I can put it.
Okay. Bootsin, are you seeing any movement towards productions, including a greening department at venues or with the touring production? We're going to go with a hard yes on that one. There are quite a few specific greening initiatives that go on tour. Some of them are happening on tour, and companies like Reverb are helping out with that, community greening and stuff like that. AEG actually has a new greening initiative. So yes, tours want to be greener. They want to do more recycling. They want to do more local farming. I know that when I'm blessed enough to work with Steve D on one of his tours, the artist prefers local catering, organic. We are very, very environmentally conscious on that tour. There are dolphin pumps for water, not bottled water anywhere in the venue. We request recycling bins and things like that. So yes, sir, that is absolutely happening.
And we have done 2 episodes on green touring. If you want to learn more about those, you can check them out on YouTube.
Thank you very much for adding that, Doug. We sure did. Steve, I've got one for you. And this is just going to be a little bit of a conversation about what happens with peopling together on tour. How do you deal with incidents that might have any racism or sexism or just not good peopling between people, possibly touring crew and locals or unions? Steve, how do you deal with any conflict of that type thing?
Well, in a broader picture, I just don't see there's any place for it. Not saying that it doesn't exist, because we all know that it does. But if I come across it, or somebody brings it to my attention in the course of a show day, I'll exercise it really fast, because I won't. I know that the artists that I work for, and I know that myself personally, and I know that the people who I surround with myself on my crew aren't going to tolerate it. So we're not going to, it's really not something that I want to be too liberal with regards to second chances or whatnot. If somebody is out there being blatantly sexist or racist, go home. No point in that. Just go home. And I would handle that via the steward. If it, like, for instance, if it's a local stagehand who is making some derogatory remarks towards a tour member, it's not my place. Very important to remember this. Not my place to go directly to that person and tell them what or what not they can do. They don't work for me. They don't work for our band. They work for the local stage crew. So I would go to Tom and say, Tom, we have a problem, and this is how I would like to address it, and we'll have a conversation. And I can, once again, more often than not, it's a very short conversation, because as Tom said before, everybody wants to work together. Everybody wants the show to be happy. And, it's our decision. Tom can help facilitate that. And unless there's an argument to be had, or unless, it has already evolved into a bigger incident or situation. If it's just a person having a really bad attitude towards a situation, then just zip it. There's no point. You know, you're there to work. You're not there to express your opinions. Nobody's interested in that.
Thank you. Thank you. Tom, anything to add to that?
Well, you know, nothing much, but, you know, our guys tend to fight amongst themselves more than anything. And that's what I police more than fighting with the road crew, I tell you the truth.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Okay, Carpe Diem from the YouTube channel has a question. And Tom, we're going to throw this one to you. How often do you not get all the hands needed for load in, load out? In Minneapolis, there are always hands that are not booked on the call, that show up for the call in case other hands don't show up. What's your attrition ratio these days?
Well, being that it's been a bit of a time since I've been there, I can't say for sure, but I always encourage guys who were interested in just showing up to be there in case. And they were referred to as the vultures. And I was always thrilled to have them, because if I'm short, I'll grab them. And yeah, I would put a guy to work with people, you know, if people aren't there, I'm going to put the guy who's there to work.
Got it. All right.
And then I imagine, Tom, if that person does a great job and they continue to show up, then they're going to get more work from you, I would imagine.
Well, that's exactly how it works. The more calls you take, the more work you get. So a lot of the guys who are regular workers but didn't make the call will just show up at 8 a.m. and see who doesn't show.
Got it.
Amazing.
Fantastic.
I think
This
that's the end
was
of our
great.
questions, but I really enjoyed this episode. And look, if you enjoyed this too, and you can join your local labor union as well, reach out to your local people and see, because I'm sure that shows are starting to come back. So if you want to get out in the industry, then this can be your chance. So, and also let's just give it up to all the local crew. I think that this episode warrants giving it up to every single venue having the best of the best of their local
100%.
towns managing these venues. And so we're looking forward to coming back and seeing you guys as soon as we can.
And be considerate when you get back out there that a lot of these crews are going to be working to their limit.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Tom alluded to earlier that there's going to be a shortage of crew. There's no two ways about it. There are going to be shows every night of the week in every venue across North America and Europe. So just bear that in mind. The person who you might have turned up fresh-faced on day one of the tour, they might be on a 10-day run and have gone to sleep 3 hours ago. So bear that in mind.
Thanks to everyone for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next week.
Yeah, I think we're picking up rigging next week, which we are looking forward to.
We're a break next week.
Oh no, we're on a break next week.
We're on a break for the holiday next week.
Okay.
Holiday. Yep. And
Holiday?
so
Is
we'll
it
be in
Memorial
touch
Day?
with our next episodes. We want everybody to go.
I have my second show.
Jim's going to go work.
I'm gonna go
Henry's
work.
been working. Things are happening. People are doing things. Steve did a gig. It's great. Everyone, be super hopeful for the future. Get your little ducks in a row. Eat your Wheaties, and remember how to stay up late.
Everyone have a great week. Steve, Tom, it was wonderful to have you all on.
Guys.
This was
Thank you
super
very much.
informative webinar for ourselves and our students. And like always, follow us on our YouTube channel, all of our social media channel. We'll keep you all up to date on our next classes. Have a wonderful week and a break, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks
All
much.
right. Thanks,
Bye.
guys.
Everyone.
Everyone
Bye.
take care. Cheers.